Welcome to Law Scribe Media. We are here today with Maggie Brown. She is a singer, an activist, a composer. She's worked on theater plays, and she's also one of the daughters of the legend Oscar Brown Jr., God rest his soul. Welcome to the show, Maggie.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've been trying to do this for a while. I knew when I first met you that I definitely wanted you on the show. Obviously, you have a lot of wisdom to share, phenomenal music. I wanted to discuss with you before anything else just what it was like to be Oscar Brown Jr.'s daughter, because based on what I've heard from his music, I feel like it must have been a very unique experience to be his daughter, and obviously some of the skills now to translate as well, and then based on his personality through his music that one can kind of discern how that might have been like in the home. So if you don't mind, a little bit more about your father and how it was like, being his daughter.
Well, let's see. First of all, Oscar had 7 children, so 5 girls and 2 boys. Okay. But that was over the course of 3 marriages, so I have sisters and brothers that I have different mom with, right? But so dad's 7 kids. So there were times in my life when he lived in the house with me, but there were times when a lot of my life I just lived with my mom. But if nothing else, I would visit my father, because once I was about 3, he no longer would necessarily stay in the house with us. Yeah, but in terms of those times that I would get to go to the show when he was in town, or sometimes he could send for us. And I can remember a summer one time being in San Francisco because Dad was doing a show, or being in New York one year because Dad was doing a show off Broadway. And yeah, it was definitely interesting. It definitely took me out of the routine of my Hyde Park little lifestyle, which was a cool lifestyle too, because this is back in the days when you could still go to the point and hear the drummers, and it was a real community kind of setting in Harpercourt. Folks would come out there and play chess and just exchange, and it was just really a cool time to grow up in Hyde Park. But so it was nice at home, and I always felt when I was coming up by the bully kids that I went to school with, more thuggish kids, they would find out that my father's Oscar Brown Jr. and most of them didn't know what that meant. It didn't mean nothing to them. Maybe their parents knew what it meant, but it didn't really mean nothing. It just meant, I think I'm something, or you think you're famous. So I used to play it down. Not play it down, but I definitely didn't play it up, because I didn't.
Also, everyone wants to feel like their own person too.
Right, I'm my own person, and I'm not trying to act like I'm something like you need to try to pick a fight with me because my daddy, is who my daddy is. I mean, this is stupid, So I knew that at a young age. Yeah.
Okay, and then based on what I've seen from him, I haven't heard everything that he did. Obviously, I'm kind of new to it, but it seems like it was a predating of hip hop, a predating of rap, that genre. I think there might be you might say that there's some similarities between him and like Gil Scott-Heron or something like that, where they had a message, but it had a rhythm to it. So spoken word generally, I mean, it's kind of free flowing, right. So it doesn't necessarily have to rhyme. Some people just tell a story.
Spoken word means that it's spoken word. It's not necessarily poetry or
yeah. It's a little different than poetry slam, but at least based on most of the stuff that I've heard from him, he had a very descriptive, vivid storytelling style, and incredible flow, cadence, and a variety, a diverse kind of versatile voice, where he could go in different places. I was listening to his rendition of The Snake, which was...
When you call it his rendition, it's funny. I mean, he wrote it, and it's his.
Yeah,
and there are other people that recorded it, and one guy got a hit out of it I guess he was considered a Northern Soul singer, a man named Al Wilson. Okay. So this brother had a hit with his version of Oscar's. That guy had a rendition of it. But yeah, Oscar sang his song "The Snake" on one of his early albums, and other people have come along and done it. So anyway, Al Wilson's recording got more famous. Hit the charts for him in that guy's career. But fast forward that the guy that they call president of the U.S. Started using those words to The Snake
this year.
No, previous he was using it on his campaign trail.
Yeah,
and
I saw
then
that.
He also used it on the 100th day in office. Absolutely, because on that day, AP, Associated Press, and the BBC called us on the phone to see what was our reaction, how are we feeling about it.
So I had no idea, because I thought that was a much older song. So that was written by your father originally.
My father wrote that song.
Wow.
And and it comes out of the many stories, many folklore things, you know. You knew I was a snake before you took me in. You knew I was a scorpion trying to get me to make you cross across the thing, but I stung you anyway.
Yeah, it has a lot of applications.
I mean, it has a lot of applications. It's, you know, it's African folklore and, you know, just, what do you call that? When we're proverbs and so forth, you know, these things, if you look at them, they apply to life, right? So they certainly were not conceived. I'm telling you, he probably wrote The Snake, if not before I was born, right around in there, long decades ago. And it had, of course, nothing to do with the analogy that this punk is using it for. So, of course, we're insulted. Of course, we're upset. He doesn't give credit where credit is due. He says, this poem is by Al Wilson. That's not even true. Yeah. Not that I want my father's name even coming out of his mouth. So, there's righteous justice in that.
Okay.
But I know he and his camp know by now. Al Wilson didn't make the song, but they don't even want to say Oscar's name, because if you looked at what Oscar stood for and what this guy stands for, is polar opposite, and it doesn't even make sense. I'm trying to figure out just how hard of a chuckle my father's getting from who of all people is going to use his poetry, you know, to make a point, and a twisted point at that. And really, it's more autobiographical than anything when you come right down to it.
So, because I view, based on what I've seen from, you know, we obviously have Gwendolyn Brooks, another creative genius from Chicago.
Yes.
But your father was definitely up there in the pantheon, and of the creative.
The difference was that he didn't publish as much.
Right.
You know, had he published more, he could have been, I think, you know, recognized a bit more, and published, like, even just on the literary side. And of course, the record industry shut it down after a certain point. They weren't trying to give him no more deals and let this outspoken guy, you know, have no record deals. It wasn't like it is today.
Yeah.
You know, and so, but I realized, looking at the people that have these places in our history, that we can, you know, look at their work and hold it up to the light and, you know, illuminate what they contributed. I brought that one book, you know, that I said is my father's book of poetry, that a brother, Arthur Amaker, who's still a professor over at Chicago State U, he had a publishing company, and he happened to meet Dad and said, hey, you know, interested in having, you know, have you ever had a book published? He's like, no, why don't you do it? And so, you know, he did. Now, Arthur's no longer in the business. That Oyster Knife Publications is no longer. So we have the property itself to be able to at least, you know, put this book out a little more widely, because it was never widely distributed, and to put out more things of his literature, because as well as, you know, writing poetry that is more so in maybe song form, he did a lot of things. He wrote in something he called long song. So this might be on a subject, and instead of, you know, a song usually has about 3-4 verses, this might have 40 verses in this thing, and it's a long song, but it tells, you know, a poignant story. And he was a very he stuck pretty strictly to the rhythm and the matching. You know, if it's a second line rhyme and it's a second line rhyme and it does not rhyme with the same word, no, he will find a word that works for what he wants to say, that is not just a repeat of the same word. And so I think that has influenced me a lot in my writing now, that, like you say, it's not as easy for me to write free-flowing without feeling like a poetic restriction, so to speak, or I won't even call it restriction, but a framework that I have to, a template structure that I need to stay in, you know. Right. So that it's cool. It's cool because there was a time when people would say, "Oh, you writing? Are you writing songwriting?" I was like, "Not really. I'll get a little idea and write down a few lines, and that sucker will sit in the drawer for 4 years." But the day just came where it became a lot more accessible for me to call on poetry to express a particular thought, like when I go in schools with the kids and we try to write something together, take their ideas, put it on the board, and then we turn it into something poetic that we can put to a beat that they like, and then start saying that and hope it'll sink in.
So yeah, you bring up the commercial side of it. Do you think it may have been that he didn't he was more of an activist-minded person, so he just kind of wanted to get the stuff out and then keep going, like, as opposed to somebody who's, like, in modern day, you know, there's a lot of people who are very self-promotion, and
starting a clothing line and doing the next thing and the next thing, yes, and just going further and further toward entrepreneurship,
right,
and even capitalism. And yes, absolutely, Oscar Brown Jr. was not so much in it for the money. He knew it owed him a living, and he could let, what we always said, you know, people with a lot less done a lot more. You know, have made a lot more off of a lot less. And so it was never that it didn't deserve to be well supported, but that it certainly was not his focus. And he certainly could see where the tangles that were involved with the music industry even back then. He didn't like that part. He knew he didn't like the jive part of it. He didn't like that middleman being able to control and try to tell you how to sing, what you're going to sing. Oh, yeah. He was on Columbia Records, and so his first few albums were more his stuff. But there was a time, it was either the third or the fourth album that they were like, oh, Oski, you know, come on, maybe we could lighten up a little and going to try to take a different kind of route, you know. And so that album was called In a New Mood. And did hardly had only one of his songs on it. He was covering tunes, you know, please send me someone to love and stuff like that. They were just trying to mellow him out, because I don't know if you checked it out, but his very first album called Sin and Soul, well, it was very much a you know, it was a what do you call it, a groundbreaker, or, you know, landmark kind of thing in the jazz music, in the way that he had this spoken thing. He did on that one, if I'm not mistaken, he does either 40 Acres and a Mule, or maybe Bit of Men was on another one, but it's like he did some really, you know, powerful stuff. And
what year was that? Was it the early 60s?
You're talking like 60, maybe, like maybe 60 or 61, and so so back then he was saying, if I'm not mistaken, I once read, but to a bass beat, if I'm not mistaken, I once read, back during that short spell I spent in school, where every slave set free was supposed to get for slaving 40 acres and a mule. Now, I'm not saying this to see folks sweat, cause I'm not bitter, neither am I cruel, but ain't nobody paid for slavery yet. About my 40 acres and my mule, you know. And it went on like that. Well, if that ain't the groundwork to what rap and spoken word became in the music industry, then I don't, you know, it definitely is a contributor. And
not only that, but it's so much more potent.
It's political, verbally. It's social justice, or I mean, you know, it's verbal and that kind of thing. You know, they didn't want conscious music particularly. At a certain point, once they realized that, ooh, this will turn people on, they'll all start marching to the same beat and in the same direction. Oh, stop him, cut that out. No, don't give him a deal. Blacklist him, you know, pull his stuff out. He did a song called Elegy. Speaking of Gwendolyn Brooks, our poet laureate, she had written a poem called Elegy to a Plain Black Boy, and it was of DeWitt Williams on his way to Lincoln Cemetery. And so Dad recalled that there was this young man, I forgot the probably scandalous circumstances under which he died at an early age, and when they had his funeral, they kind of marched it through the neighborhood, and he was saying he was fairly young, and, you know, it was kind of one of the first times he experienced, you know, death like that, you know. And so then she had written this poem. Well, one of the few times Oscar put music to someone else's poetry is in this case. So he wrote a song, and it was recorded, and it started, you know, playing on the radio stations. People were liking it. So it says, he was born in Alabama, doo-doo-doo's blues. He was bred in Illinois. He was nothing but a plain black boy. Swing low, sweet, sweet chariot. Nothing but a plain black boy. Drive him past the pool hall, drive him past the show, blind within his casket. Oh, but maybe he'll know. Down through 47th Street, underneath the L, the northwest corner prairie that he loved so well. Swing low, sweet, sweet chariot. Nothing but a plain black boy. So those are Gwendolyn's words and Daddy's melody. And he recorded it, and as I said, it was going very well on the charts. And the NAACP was at that time protesting the idea that colored people should agree to calling themselves black. Wow. And they went and had the radio stations boycotted. The radio stations would not play it. Oh, you figure I'll have to go back and look, but yeah, I'll look at when that album came out. But yeah, again, we're still probably in the '60s.
Okay.
You know, and folks weren't quite ready to be called black versus colored. You know, nigga, Negro to colored to black, and now African American.
It's interesting because Malcolm kind of had a prescience about that, like in terms of where it was headed. You know, he had predicted African American.
He thought Afro, right, Afro American, right. And so, you know, Afro kind of for us meant the fro, actually. But, of course, we knew it had to do with African. And then finally it was like, don't be ashamed to say it, African American.
So, obviously, you are also a poet and a singer in your own right. And I know you're working on a lot of different activist kind of projects, I guess. One of the things that you're doing right now is, you know, you're working at the... Theater Gates Rebuild Foundation?
Oh, Theaster. Theaster Gates.
Theaster, okay.
He calls it the Rebuild Foundation. For he's gone into an area on the southeast side of Chicago called Grand Crossing and done things to rebuild. Instead of sort of like tearing down or just, you know, things, he's working to rebuild. For example, somehow the brother got the big Stony Island Arts Bank for about $1. It had been sitting there most of my life, vacant, abandoned.
I heard there are some of those opportunities in the city.
Oh, still all around. And yeah, and you know, I'm not sure who you have to know. I'm sure, you know, you have to know somebody. But yes, there are places where great properties that they will take a whole lot of money, you know, to pour into them, to make them work again. But, you know, he's one of those people that in Grand Crossing, he's bought up many properties. He started this arts bank, which is a place where I get to perform each Saturday afternoon. Stony Island at Arts Bank at 68th and Stony, so it's part library, part museum, and event space at this point. They've been given some collections, including like John H. Johnson's private library collection included 15,000 books. So there's this room with books from floor to ceiling for 2 levels. It's just real beautiful. Wow. And there's a lot that can be done with it, and they have programs going on, and sometimes people just, you know, rent the space for their events. But I know probably like many organizations, you kind of get the money and the funds to get things going, but then sustaining those activities, you know, and really being effective at making sure that the community knows and gets in there and takes advantage of these things. I think that's often a, you know, a hardship for organizations. And there was other organizations you're also a part of where we met at the University Church with the Blue Gargoyle. Right. So the University Church has been there forever, and I've been in attendance to the church since my boys were little. And then, of course, also out of that same building, that property had an organization called Blue Gargoyle that really grew out of grew organically out of human need. Again, we're looking back to the late 50s or something, you know, and by the 60s that people who attended the church saw the needs of the community, whether it was turning one of the halls in the church into a cafe or coffee house for discussions and dealing with social justice issues. And then it became a matter of there are people in the community that need literacy training, and so they started having literacy, and children can always stand some creative arts camps, so they started having summer camps and theater camps. And that building just allowed for the meeting of organizations that were, again, addressing human need, whether that human need is economic or, you know, social justice related or what have you. And because we have someone with us still who, you know, Julie Less, who absolutely was there in those days and helped to initiate things like some of the earliest concerts of the AACM, you know, artists started happening there, and they went on to, you know, perform around the world and be well thought of in all the history books as they contributed to what's called avant-garde jazz, you know. And so a lot of historic, we found out even go more recently when Blue Gargoyle defunct about 6-7 years ago, whatever, not long before that, Chance, you know, he was one of the youth that came through there when they were doing parties, and, you know, they're just common, I think, had come there and done some things way before we knew of these people. So it was a place in the neighborhood that we want to restore its being a refuge for young people. You know, when it seems like there's nothing much hip to get into on the streets, of course, then you can come in here, and whether it's training or attending an open mic or being a part of the open mic or, you know, studying, we have tutors, and we're just looking to right now partner with organizations that have a similar vision for, we are youth, you know, we service youth, and that's our focus, is to be there so that it's not that there's not good, hip things affordable, maybe free. Mostly that's what we want to be able to make it so it's accessible.
Yeah, and one of the things that's been missing, I think, in this generation more so than any other, maybe the last couple decades, is mentorship, because I think that was the vehicle of transmission for, you know, talent, skills, and things like that. Because you may have raw skill, but like for having someone who's kind of been through that path, whatever you know path you want to choose, it's nice to have that, you know, someone who can kind of guide you, help you avoid pitfalls, kind of help you focus, narrow your focus, so you can you really, you know, be successful.
Don't have to make the same mistakes they went through, and just
right. And I think that creates a cohesive environment for that kind of thing to just naturally evolve.
Right. When that's the spirit of the people already. But yes, over these decades, it has become much more individualized and kind of just into their.
Exactly.
You know, everybody just kind of into this.
They call it social media, but it's made people less social.
Right, exactly. So it's less humanly social.
Right.
We talking and stuff's going on, communication, but
it's digital and it's not as real.
That's right.
And one of the things that I think that some kids may discover if they end up coming there, and I hope they do and continue to do so, is that they may have latent skills that they don't really know that they have. Because sometimes, you know, if nobody reinforces you, or if, you know, obviously kids get bullied in school, and, you know, there's not so much you can really do about some of that stuff. So if you're not resilient naturally, then you may think that I don't have the skill, or I don't think I can do this, you know. But when you come to an environment that's like healthy and organic and you know,
nurturing,
there to cultivate that, then you may discover, oh wait, you know.
That's right.
And so that's why that encouragement is such an important factor as we grow up, because I feel like every child has incredible potential. Maybe not the same potential, or maybe not the exact same areas of life, but, you know, I think that immersing children into that kind of creative space gives them like avenues of, you know, potential that they maybe didn't think of, and it just opens things up, you know. So as a mother, what would you say about, you know, maybe raising, let's say, 3 black boys? You said you have sons, right?
Yeah, I have 3 sons.
So in the city, knowing that, you know, there's obviously the environment, that some of that stuff you can't do nothing about, but obviously you also have control in terms of the household culture, in terms of, you know, instilling values and things like that. So talk about that challenge.
Well, yeah, it is something, you know, because of my lifestyle. I sort of have one foot in the matrix and one out, because I don't have like a 9 to 5, and I'm not sort of locked into what is maybe considered normal, because you know how with America, you know, everything's kind of dictated. You're supposed to take vacation now it's holiday now, you know, this is when you're off, and everybody's supposed to be on their schedule. And when they were little, of course, I had to comply to that more because of daycare or school, as the case may be. But because I'm self-employed and I work through arts and so forth, I don't really punch a clock, so they don't see that example. And sometimes I wonder if, you know, I want them to be able to have, you know, lives where they're not just dependent on punching some clock, that they're entrepreneurs and independent enough to make their way. So that I'm giving an example in that respect. But if it does come down to being a corporate person, they will not have seen that example from mom. But definitely they know and are very respectful boys, in that I get compliments all the time, and I know for myself that I can't tell you a time that my 3 sons, and they're close in age, 2 years apart, that they've argued, been like, you know, I'm not speaking to him, or don't get out of my room, or, you know, don't take that off my plate. It's more like, did the brothers eat? You know, before one eats, like, you know, they always refer to each other as the brother. So did something right in the, you know,
let me ask you
the expectation of loving a peaceful coexistence in the household.
How do you think you inculcated that? Because I think that that's missing a lot. Doesn't matter race or whatever. I think it's generally missing with this new generation. So what do you think that was the most specific thing that, you know,
I give God and the angels credit, you know, just for knowing that I wouldn't have been able to handle boys, you know, kids with different temperaments. A lot of fussing. I didn't have it so much coming up myself. I was a good deal younger than everybody. So, I mean, who am I going to stand up against? But no, for the most part, even I didn't experience the big sibling rivalry thing. I saw my friends and other people that went through it, but we just didn't have it too tough. So I'm not exactly sure, other than the way that I guess express love, express things like, even early on, like you couldn't say shut up, you know, hate this, hate that. I mean, I really tried to just stop them from doing that. I tried to hold off the bomb them up, shoot them up video games for as long as I could. You know, we didn't get a system when all the other people were getting systems
Right.
for their kids that age. It was like, no, I'm trying to hold it off because I know once it starts, there'll be no turning back. And they know
and
that
it takes them out from outside and like playing and like with
physical activity, the whole bit, interacting with other people, figuring out how to do that. Yes, and so the game thing and the negative music, you know, I didn't want to hear a bunch of crazy negative words and referring to women. So now they're 14, 16, 18, about to flip too, about to become, what is that, 15, 17, 19, like. And so, of course, they listen to the crazy music. They play the bomb 'em up, shoot 'em up games. But they are still respectful young men, and they still get along well and are compassionate, heartfelt. You know, they look you in the eye, and that's, you know, people will just say, I ran into your sons, and they are just, I just want to tell you you're doing a great job. So then, by no means perfect. My oldest didn't get all his credits. He didn't get to walk. We're still struggling with that, you know, as far as he's concerned, a GED is cool. It's like, that is so totally not cool to me. You know, you had everything you needed. There was no reason not to do it. But I realized there's a lot of disenchantment with this situation.
With the system,
With the system.
Almost
and
nothing works
conscious,
properly.
and I did raise them conscious. You know, they've been around me and all my little Afrocentric friends, and they know who their granddad was, and they understand, you know, the things that their forefathers were about. So, you know, a lot of the illusions that most Americans try to keep their children under, I haven't, you know. And so I just believe that even with the oldest, as I watch them grow, they're definitely very individual, that there might be a time when, you know, I sing this song about how what if they grow up and aren't like the people we think they ought to be? Then how can we show we still love them? So we have this mold and this image and, you know, what we project for our children to grow up to be. But hey, you know, we had them, but we're not them. And, you know, they're not us. Yeah. And so at a certain point, female, you know, got to kind of let them go. Their dad lives in a different state. And it's like, I know I've done well, you know, maybe as a mother, even for where I had to stand in as a dad. But there's obviously that which I cannot do. I'm not going to get in nobody's chest and be like trying to beat you into submission. That's just not, I didn't get that, you know. We didn't really believe in that. You know, and so I haven't tried to run my household like that. But it is definitely challenging. I can remember I was telling someone how we used to live a little closer to Washington Park, so over by Providence Hospital, 49th, you know, and for my kids, there was one summer when I made sure all three of them had bikes, and then they could ride, the three of them could get on their bikes, even with the little brother, but they could all make it over into Hyde Park. And once that happened, life changed for us. You know, there was an independence that just they were given. And I was, too, a time that I didn't have to take them every single where, sit there and watch them while they ride their bike in the park and all that. No, it's like, nope, it's safe enough. I feel comfortable enough. Because once they got in the Hyde Park, especially, everybody was going to know them. Be like, hey, that Maggie's kids. It's like, you can't mess up and you can barely get in trouble. Cause
community kind of helped
raise. It's totally community, yeah. And so it changed things and it gave an independence that, I mean, have our neighborhood been, I don't know, 63rd and Halstead, I'd have been scared as you know what. I just, you know, they have had it some sheltering in terms of when I thought I needed to, and even to this day, I take them. I'll go get them from the train before you have to necessarily come through the hood at night. You know, if I'm up to it, isn't that why I have a car? I don't need us to have some crazy thing happen because I want you to be a man and, you know, don't be scared. I think there's other ways I better teach them courage, you know.
Yeah.
So,
one of the things that you promote a lot and the concepts that called edutainment. Tell us what you think what you mean by that, and how it's manifested, you know, in your work.
Okay. Well, edutainment. My dad, Oscar Brown Jr., was the first person I heard refer to it as such. Just that it's educational entertainment, you know. And a lot of times, I think, to me, when I look at some of the decadent things that we entertain ourselves with, that you know, for the sake of just amusing, you kind of do anything, right? But I'm just seeking to use my talent, the attention that I'm given when an audience is present, to, you know, do something, express something that maybe uplifts, that betters the situation. I feel some sense of responsibility for doing that with my voice and with the attention that I'm given because of the talent I was blessed with, right? So if everything was all cool, then I probably wouldn't have to think about or sing about problems and how to make things better and how we can get over this and past this.
Right.
But since they're as yucky as they are, and I brought in these 3 little boys, you know, that are growing up to be men, to have to try to figure out how to wield and maneuver in what's really, you know, very corrupt and, you know, full of trickeration kind of world. Then what am I gonna do to contribute to it being better? You know, it being better. And so educational entertainment, I was talking to you earlier about how I developed a show that would teach and it would entertain but also teach and educate about the history and evolution of black music.
Is that Legacy?
Legacy, yep,
Okay.
Our Wealth of Music, because I discovered through researching and gathering information that there's great wealth in the musical expressions of our ancestors. And so I wanted to lay it out in such a way that when people watch me do this show and participated as we do in its call and response style and interactive way, that, you know, we would all come out feeling uplifted and feeling better and more reverence and admiration for the music and the ancestors and what they did, as well as feeling a sense of responsibility to, you know, carry it on with some dignity.
Right, with continue the transmission.
Yeah, continuum. And so that was a lot of the intention, as well as making a living, still doing what I love, being able to then market myself by doing edutainment kinds of things, then versus just say being in a band with a trio or doing wedding bands or doing nightclubs, as the case were when I was starting. Then this way, by doing edutainment, I'm marketing myself to schools, universities, libraries, you know, museums, corporations, especially Black History Month time, African American History Month now, you know, corporations, craft, all kinds of places have called me in because they need programming to honor and acknowledge Black history. So it's taken me into some wonderful venues, doing it for over 20 years now.
Tell me a little bit more in detail for people who haven't seen it, obviously,
Oh, yes.
and like what it entails, how you kind of structured it, and maybe the runtime, how it, you know, incorporates everything.
Well, yeah, usually the very first time I got to do it, there was something called the World Music Program at the Field Museum of Natural History here. And so I had a contact, and I'd seen another artist I knew doing his World Music Program, which talked about wonderful indigenous instruments and things that he had made. And he let me know that if I put something together and appealed to the field, they might want to put my show up in this same kind of programming. So I embarked on asking them if I could have a date. And that date was a few months out. And so that gave me time to do some research and gather information and material. I wanted to return to the idea of something I saw. My father was in a television series, public television, did a series called From Jump Street. And From Jump Street was basically chronicled the history of black music. And when it came out, we were about at disco. You know, we were still, back then, it was more the 70s or 80s, early 80s. And so I wanted to return to that idea and make a show that would tell this history, tell that story going all the way from its African roots and the field hollers and work songs of the African, I don't like to call them slaves, my ancestors, the laborers, all the way up to present day rap and hip hop, and show the connection and show that, you know, everything's just really a continuum, y'all. We don't have to look at jazz and blues like, that old yucky stuff, and oh Lord, if I could turn you on to just how hip ragtime was when it hit the scene and what it did to the music industry that you are now supporting. That's a multi-billion-dollar music industry, but you don't realize Scott Joplin wrote the first million seller. The first time a piece of sheet music sold 1 million copies was his Maple Leaf Rag. But of course the brother Scott Joplin didn't own the printing press, and therefore he died, you know, broken, half crazy, even though he had the popular music of the day. And these cats and kittens don't see how much they still getting pimped out. I don't care how many dimes they're getting. Somebody else is getting a whole dollar, you know, the other 90 cents. And plus it's like,
and they've made it worse. These 360 deals, I don't know how familiar you are with them, but they just are total in slavery. I mean, so, you know,
we talking industry.
And I think personally, I mean, just based on what I know and what I can see, is that it's, people will be like, oh, like for example, even with me, people will be like, well, you better do it this way, otherwise you won't get nobody to like your stuff. And I'm like, you know, now we're in a global marketplace, so there's even more of an opportunity for you to be very specific about your style and unique, and there's always someone out there that wants to listen to it.
You can't dictate. And see, that's just it. For this industry to try to make us feel like this is all people want,
right?
That's a trick. You've been hoodwinked and bamboozled, as my man said. You know,
Mos Def said something interesting a few years back. He said, "Well, if you give all you give the people are acorns, and that's what they think that's all there is."
They think it's just the world of acorns, and that's it. That's exactly right. And it's absurd. I know there are movements. I've seen folks at different events, and they handed me a pamphlet. I know that there is a movement to just, thoughts are things. Words have power. Everything that we see around us was
it might be the most powerful thing there is.
Listen, everything around us was first a thought. Whether it was the concept of the Most High or some man or woman who thought of it first, and then energy and everything went into making it come to be what we're now looking at and touching and doing, right?
Right.
So it's not that stuff is frivolous, and the beat is very important and powerful too. So now if you're going to put some old negative words that are not, they don't support humanity, they don't support good human relationships, because everybody's calling each other out of their name and just acting like everything's just about either drugs, sex, or spending a bunch of money, or screwing, that is not going to, that's not helping us evolve and ascend to what I think is really more of a movement of where the earth and other things want to go in this direction,
Right.
And unfortunately, there are a whole bunch of people that they don't even see that they're being duped. They don't even realize that this is just totally wrong. And to think of the vibration of the music that is popular.
Yeah.
So to do legacy, to come away from some sort of intense research of looking into, how did our music, what happened? What happened from the time we wasn't singing on them cotton fields because we were content to be civilized by the overseer and them. We were singing to hold on to some sanity, to recall some of our cultural traditions that they couldn't beat out of us, and to hold on to a little bit of our culture, and remember some of the things that held us together as a community. And those little things that they carried on in different ways and could put them into the music and express themselves and relieve themselves of the misery, of the treachery through this music. That is such a powerful thing, and it did help them. It helped them to survive, and it helped them to somehow stay sane in a very insane situation. But I know and I believe that music came from a spiritual place. It came from a place that understood we're one community. If you separate it, you get kidnapped and you get taken over to Philadelphia, your mama's still your mama no matter where they take you. Isn't that right? Right. And so, this being... when I approach the industry, or anybody approaches the industry, people, or somebody tells me in my act or my, my stage show, people don't want to be preached to, or, well, and I'm not trying to act
maybe
like
not
I'm
everybody,
church,
but
I am going to say what's on my heart, and a song I'm singing might inspire little dialogue and little reference to what's going on and what I think we might do to help it. And that's what it's about. It's about being natural. People tried to call Lauryn Hill crazy because she decided that she wasn't going to play the game, that it's just about natural. It's just about being real. That's really what it's about. And she knew that from the beginning, but she achieved that success. And I think it's just ridiculous, because if you know what it really is, this is a spiritual connection. Everybody doesn't get gifted with being able to just hear something out the clear air and make a beautiful song that just, touches people, moves people, and endures. That is a great gift. Yeah. But to me, there's a great responsibility that comes with that gift. And it's beyond more than just getting your pockets fat and exploiting a sister, making her look like something, other than a woman, in order to just get rich. That's just the lowest of the low. And then for sisters to fall for it, it's very sad.
Well, I think it's orchestrated, and that's where,
we know it ain't no accident.
Right.
It is no accident.
People, what they try to do and what they try to promote as well, this is what youth culture now is. But it's like, is art imitating life, or is life imitating art? Because
right.
and when you have these billion-dollar corporations and they have this agenda, and anyone who's been in the industry, if you've heard some of these stories where they call it Illuminati or whatever they call it, the kind of sick, ridiculous things that they are forced to do in order to quote unquote succeed.
Right.
it facilitates the degrading of the culture, of the art form, and things like that. And so when, you know, if you block off all the conscious, you know, awareness and stuff, and you just feed people this filth, I mean, eventually they're just going to be erased on. It's the same thing when it comes to like organic food versus, you know, just potato chips all day, you know. It's the same thing. If you just make that available, it's going to over time have a corrosive effect. And so the things that we're involved in, that's why we do those things, because, you know, as artists, we want, you know, to be able to impart that, you know, ability, that consciousness, that awareness that, hey, you know, as a unique individual, you have the capacity to approach this how you wish to approach it based on your experiences and things like that. And one of the things I'll say is that a lot of the greatest musicians in history, you know, were etched in the cauldron of incredible personal difficulty and distress and horrific experiences and things like that. You know, one of my close friends, Jonathan Mad Code, he's an amazing hip hop artist. I mean, the stories that he'll tell you in terms of what he grew up with in the Marcy Projects in New York and Brooklyn, I mean, it's insane. Like, you can't even believe this is a real thing. Like, you hear about it on TV, and it's like not just one story, but he's got like dozens of these types of stories. And so, you know, like, how difficult is it really to put out a record after you've been through something like that? Because if you've been through that, like, you know, hey, putting in some more effort and sweating a little bit in the booth is nothing, you know, because you know that you are a vessel for something, you know, and people can learn from those things and be motivated by it, you know. Even people who, like, let's say, want to have a transformation with their physical bodies, like, you know, they let themselves go and then they want to bring it back. You know, they listen to music that inspires them while they work out and things like that.
In order to be motivated.
So it's a soundtrack for like life in a lot of ways. And I know that in your case, you know, you've had a lot of like edutainment type of music. So one of the things that we had discussed before the show was the Great Migration and your grandfather. So tell us a little bit more about that, and if you want, after that, you know, maybe we could have the song as well.
Okay, all right. Well, I was talking to you about a lot of people always acknowledge my father, Oscar Brown Jr., but Oscar Brown Sr. was my grandfather, and he certainly influenced us both. And so, like, you know, I brought the book. My grandfather did make an autobiography called By a Thread, and, you know, he just talks about, you know, our lives, the fragileness of our lives. So I just want to maybe take a moment to read a little something from Oscar Brown Sr. Why does he call it By a Thread? He says, he was writing this from Fort Des Moines, Iowa, when he was in the Army, right? Upon my arrival at the station in Vicksburg, 3 young Negro men came up to me and asked if anyone had bothered me. No one had, I told them. They expressed pride in my being a commissioned officer, so to see a black commissioned officer was like a big deal. They were concerned about my safety throughout the balance of the night, so they took me with them to Wesley Creighton's recreation pool room on Washington Street, and there we stayed until it was time for me to get my train to Edwards. Who were these men? Individually, we didn't know each other. A few years before, I too had wandered around the railroad station in Edwards, Mississippi. These men were part of that vast, underprivileged population, sometimes referred to unsympathetically as the masses. From this group, the successful ones of us ascend, and the height of our ascendancy is dependent upon them as our foundation base. Therefore, as heavy a load as it may seem to be, we must pull them up and along as we try to climb. So that's not the part about why he named it By a Thread, talking about the sinews of our life are so delicate that one little change could just change everything. But that was something that has, you know, guided his life, and it made a strong influence on me, obviously, in the work that I've taken on. One other thing I wanted to read was you know, the motivation for him writing this, because of course he says, perhaps had it not been for the interest and inquisitiveness of my children and grandchildren, I might have continued to put off this attempt to recount my saga. But instead he tells his story of a large and devoted family. We were poor and struggling, as were most Negroes in the period shortly after the abolition of legal slavery. While we had only few material comforts, it was at this point that our poverty ended. We were blessed with immeasurable riches of Christian parents of above average training for that time. My father had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge of the world in which we lived and of people, places, and things, and a great desire to introduce this knowledge to his growing children. often. Our summer nights were spent at what our brother Sidney described as the front porch university. Here, in mental explorations, we traveled in dreams and hopes, which lifted our sights and hopes far beyond our local confinement. Here, we were taught that success included many ingredients. Economic independence was a basic objective. Kindness, compassion, and concern for the well-being of one's fellow man were considered indispensable. I have accepted these ingredients as fundamentals in my own life. So that's from my grandfather, Oscar Brown Sr., who came up from Edwards, Mississippi with his, one by one, he had 4 brothers, and they managed to raise the fare to send them up on the train one by one to Howard University in D.C. I know he had to work the train and, you know, do dishes and, you know, shine shoes, and eventually one of the brothers got put on with a printing shop, and that made a big difference because then he could make a kind of money that could really help the other brothers make that journey and get their education. And then Oscar Sr., you know, settled in Chicago when the Great Migration was, you know, in its height.
Did he write other things as well, or did he do
Oscar
poetry?
Sr. just wrote the one. So this is my granddad, and he wrote the one autobiography. But my father is, you know, the poet and wrote plays and songs and a lot of essays and articles that we hope to get published, you know, that weren't in his lifetime.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so that my grandfather, when I go to schools, and a lot of times, depending on the age and grade level, they're studying the migration. And just during this year that we're in, an organization, a consortium, you know, went down to the government, to the powers that be in Illinois, and said, hey, look, 1917 was about, by then, black people were coming in droves. The Great Migration was definitely in full swing. So right now, we're looking at the 100th anniversary, and we want to have a centennial commemoration. So this past year has had a lot of activities as it relates to a centennial celebration of the Great Migration. And I know a lot of people, you know, you might say Great Migration, they maybe think they know or just get blank and like don't know. And so I had written a couple of verses about it to perform for some students I was working with. But once the initiative to do the centennial was put on the table, and they had folks like me at the table, like, okay, as it relates to cultural artists, expression of things we're going to do this year, you know, we want you all to have input. So I went back to my little song and put a third verse on that particularly, you know, acknowledges the metropolis, you know, the Bronzeville metropolis that grew out of our need because, you know, like we know that back when black folks first got up here in Chicago, it wasn't that we could just do business anywhere or live anywhere. There were restrictive housing covenants. We were relegated only to certain areas of the city. And then we couldn't just go into any bank. Things were still segregated. And so we had our own businesses. And thus grew a place like Bronzeville, a metropolis that we created for our needs in our little secluded area of the city. So here goes a migration song, written by yours truly. I'll tell you what makes it. A lot of folks don't know what makes it a great migration. What makes it a great migration is that folk back then would travel great distances to secure a future of positive instances. And though the journey was filled with danger, keeping faith in what's unseen to my people is no stranger. Did I mention all the miles that they covered in search of their hopes and dreams to discover, seeking a life free of grueling labor and an opportunity to taste the city flavor, the way that it moved people out from the sharecropper life of the South. The fact that without Jim Crow, hope and progress had a chance to grow. So I'll tell you what makes it, y'all say, what makes it a great migration? I'll tell you what makes it, ask me, what makes it a great migration is that people made a new start in their life so that their children wouldn't have the same strife. It gave a chance for a better education to move black people forward for the new generation. The music moved up as people moved out into new frontiers and venues, no doubt. Then jazz got a college education, and jazz spread beyond the nation. Jazz spread through cities and across the seas. Without segregation, racism could freeze. The music led to more communication, helping improve human relations. The fact that it came with a price, the price of many an American's life. The fact that it helped them to see jazz improvisation made the people feel free. Ooh-wee, I'll tell you what makes it, y'all say. I'll tell you what makes it, ask me. What makes it a great migration? New landscapes gave way to seizing opportunity. When folk first arrived to build a new community, my people faced struggles and injustice. In spite of odds, we came up winning, you can trust this. Y'all see proof in the metropolis that flourished, making way for the movement which was nourished, building on unity, forging revolution, standing up for our future. They were marching to a solution. Fact that it came with a price of many a black person's life. The fact that it helped them to grow up proud enough to wear an afro. So I'll tell you what makes it. Y'all say what makes it. I'll tell you what makes it. Ask me what makes it a great migration. I'll tell you what makes it a great migration. How makes it a great migration? Race is not given to the swift, no, but to the one who endureth. They were walking. I'll tell you what makes it a great migration. That's why I'm here.
Beautiful. That was amazing. Thank you so much for that. So you do perform this with the other. Is it part of the legacy? This specific.
Well, yeah. You know, now that I have a migration song, sometimes I slip that in, you know, to my legacy show. Cause yeah, legacy. Oh, by the way, is about when I do it in the schools, 45 to 60 minutes. The first time I ever did it at the Field Museum was probably about 90 minutes, and I really went a lot deeper. But then I needed to sort of narrow it down and make it more tailored to what schools need. And a lot of times they want something that falls in about 45 to 60 minutes. So I have a nice succinct, and it's packed. I mean, from the moment I start talking, I usually do it one-woman show style.
Right.
And I use tracks. But there have been times when the budget allows, and I can hire a band, you know, have other people. I've even done it at the big Regal Theater years ago with a whole cast and everything, you know. So it can be done really big. In fact, the ideal would be that I would do legacy. If legacy starts with really when we were just, you know, with our voices, you know, maybe even in Africa, okay, drums and our percussions and stuff. But once we got here, we didn't have nothing but our voice crying out in the hot sun, you know, and it helped us to survive. It wasn't about selling no units or, you know, making the charts and nothing. It was about just, you know, holding on to some for your heart to survive this mess, you know. And out of that has grown this music that really does still enrich us, you know. And it really can still be very nurturing to your soul.
Absolutely.
And now that we have the consciousness and the information that we have, we really should be using it in that way. You know, why wouldn't we? You know, so with legacy, I do it one-woman show style.
Have you ever set it up as a tour, like something that maybe you hit up a lot of different cities?
Oh, listen, I've definitely wanted to. I've never had an agent or management. You know, I've always done things for myself. There was a time when through the Wilmette schools, a woman knew me and knew what I did and really was supportive. And she got me in front of a committee that was, this is a long time ago, more than a decade, 15 years, where, you know, they were concerned with having more acknowledgement of black history out in Wilmette. So every school except New Trier, which I understand still has a bit of a stranglehold on segregation over there, but every school but New Trier accepted. This committee was like supporting most of the fee. So school didn't have to pay for much. It was almost like, hey, we're going to help you have this show for February. So I did every school in Wilmette. But other than that, it's just been, you know, my sporadic dates around here and there. I would love to, like, I've always said I want to go to historically black colleges and just do a HBCU college tour. Just any college tour. It doesn't have to be that. But especially a college that has jazz studies, you know, and African American history studies. Right. Because this absolutely relates, and I know they have budgets to bring in lecturers. So this is Legacy is kind of a demonstration lecture.
Well, it's kind of unfortunate that they always kind of relegate Black History to February, which is the shortest month.
We know.
But you know, working around that and
but it is like being an evergreen tree salesman in December, and you do have to just jump on it, you know.
Right, exactly, and that's why, based on what you're telling me, I think that it might be a good idea, whether you do it yourself or you have an agent, or and obviously we can go out and seek out, and whoever in the community would help facilitate that. But it just seems like something like 14 to 15 dates within the month of February, a tour throughout the United States on the biggest cities. I think that would be amazing. And then also
the show is beautiful, and it
to have a documentary too, like that way people can afterwards.
Ever since I started doing it, I've known that, because everybody asks, "Ooh, can I get a video of this?" Yeah. And it's like the thing that it was when I put it together, it was like this. If I needed to I wanted people to hear what the music really sounded like. Well, for me to really demonstrate what the big band sounds like, oh my God, I don't have that kind of budget, right? I don't even have a budget to have a hip blues quartet in all the schools. But if I make a recording of tracks that are as close to how the music sounded, so that I can give you an impression of what it was, right? That started my thought of like, just trying to make it so that, not only did you have the real impression of what Duke Ellington's band sounded like, or, how Louis Armstrong, but I kind of forgot that thought. What was your question? You said...
I was specifically talking about trying to make it real, maybe.
Making it a video. The fact is, I use music excerpts of people's stuff that, is not mine. So that was the thing that always stopped me, was like, okay, I'd have to really go out and get the permission to have this particular song play, little snippets of music, mostly it's us listening to a little excerpt or something, or me referencing it with my voice. So that's not impossible, and sometimes when you try to negotiate those kind of licenses, the fact that it's more for an educational thing and not just for a straight up, commercial use, right. Then, maybe the license is a little more lenient. Yeah. And then there's always the thought of like, hey, I don't have to necessarily, I can make a song that sounds really, really like that, right? To give that impression of what the sound was like, but without having to go through a lot of changes that they sometimes take you through. Because a lot of times the people who own the music don't look like us, don't look like the person who made the music, and they're not interested in you,
Yeah, I just envisioned that. I think that would be really nice. I think not only to shine a light on your work, which is phenomenal, but also your father, the generational stuff, and the legacy of it. And it, I don't think it would take much. I mean, once you got the date set and the specific cities, maybe a small entourage that would, to record the whole thing. That way you can turn it into a documentary afterwards, for a whole month. And then that way, people who missed out or didn't hear about it or whatever can at least, to some degree experience it afterwards.
That's true.
So
that's true.
I would, if there's any resources I can provide to help with that, I would definitely like to see that manifest, whether this coming year or whenever,
Right.
The other thing, I know that you've done a lot more work than just that song. So if there's anything else that you have to
so
present,
you got a bunch of songs up your sleeve.
I know. I heard that one about violence. Obviously, in our city, people have some degree of knowledge of the kind of horrific violence that we have in the city, especially during the summer months. But all the way around, and obviously I would say a big portion of it is economic. You don't have a lot of jobs available, and people kind of have to scrounge. Then everybody the community generally can cannibalize itself in a sense, and that's the unfortunate part. And I know you've spoken about that, I'm sure, and also done music about that. But any other music related to that specific issue as it relates to Chicago would be beautiful if you could present.
Yes. The idea that if we're entertaining ourselves with a bunch of things that are about violence and blowing things up and Grand Theft Auto and combat and then a lot of things we entertain ourselves with just on TV and the music. I don't know why people would expect for our society to be peaceful and all humane and nice when we keep entertaining ourselves with what is not It doesn't lend itself to that vibe. So I guess people don't understand that vibrations and energy matters, and everything is energy. Everything is vibration, actually. And so all this, it matters, you know. And I've written various things about stopping the violence, about just being the change, about appreciating what came before. I talk about ancient to the future. What we're doing is as old as it is new. Ancient to the future. Looking back helps us with what we gotta do. Ancient to the future. You don't diss it cause it's coming from a time that's past. Check out your connection and try to help to make it last. You know, ancient to the future. What we're doing now is drawn from what was done before. So you may want to pay more attention to some folklore. Drawing on a foundation that was strong and wise, strong and wise. Gifts of antiquity, often cloaked in front of your eyes, in front of your eyes. Jazz is improvisation. Improvisation is creation, requiring cooperation. Every member of the band has to take and lend a hand to musicians on the stand as one player steps out with a solo on their instrument. It's a communication and a cooperation, and it's a miracle. What I learned from my studies in legacy is that jazz was miraculous. You know, it was taking the pain and the suffering, any exposure our earliest musicians had to some instruments, whether they got their hands on the piano because the master had a piano and made them learn how to play for his little frivolities or whatever, or somebody had a fiddle and learned how, or 2 spoons and a thigh, you know, a fiddle with 3 strings on it. You know, we found ways to express ourselves, and really growing off of the African rhythms that were just in us from millennium of being drum burned, as my father called it. It's like we're sunburned, you get drum burned. Well, our ancestors were drum burned, and then they came and were exposed to the march tunes and European dance tunes, and together, you know, it went from you boom 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 ba ba do boom ba do ba ba dee 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 do ba 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 do ba, and then they heard beep 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 dee 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 la ba ba dee da, so it became do ba dee ba dee ba dee ba do ba ba dee ba do ba dee la dee 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 do 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 dee 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 ga do ba da ba da ba do 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 ba da ba da 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 do ba dee 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 dee. Well, that super duper syncopation, Europeans thought it was gross. You're like, oh God, that's horrible. But really, you know, that was coming off of African, you know, tradition of, you know, 2 rhythms playing at the same time, creating a whole new rhythm, you know, and just marrying. And so, yeah, it'd be beautiful if everybody could just like wake up and realize that just like one of the most beautiful things that has been born in America is that marriage of what the European brought and what the African person brought to what this music is, that has now, that jazz influenced any other music that has come ever since, you know. So yeah, it's a miraculous creation. It's a representative of the resilient spirit of my ancestors, the creation of what became known as jazz. Because really what it is improvisation. It's taking what's here and still turning it into, you know,
something new. Yeah. And let me ask you this: what is your creative process like? Let's say you have a concept that comes up in your mind, and it's just a concept at the moment, obviously. How do you chisel that down to something that has structure, something that has rhythm, something that has obviously the message that you want to portray, and then also the various voices? See, one of the things I have trouble with when I go in the booth is sometimes, like, I have a range within, you know, my voice, and sometimes a voice will come out that, you know, I hadn't fully controlled yet, so I have to go back in and do it again because, you know, there's that range. So tell me how that comes together for you in your creative process.
Well, I know when it comes to writing songs, I could say that most times the words come first, you know, and then the melody. Then I also challenge myself, as I mentioned, working in educational classrooms and stuff, to you know, take a track that exists that the young people already relate to, and then put something with that. So in that case, you know, the music kind of gets put out you know, I'm using something that exists
like that
already.
one that you did. There won't be no violence in my world.
Oh, you like? Oh, that.
I really like that. If you could do that one today, that'd be great. Actually,
we might close with that. We're gonna close with Justin for sure.
Right.
With that, my world instead of my love.
World, yeah.
And so yes, to take that process. So that's one process, and that happened. I was working with some kids over the summer. They were already studying the freedom marches and you know, and different things about the world that summer. And so when I talked to them about, let's, you know, we're gonna write something together. What's on the top of your mind? Of course, it was being safe. It being okay to go outside, because there's always these headlines about people getting shot just playing outside. So we started writing a verse for that, taking their ideas, you know, and putting it on the board, and then turning it somehow into poetry. But then in this case, I knew that I was going to take Justin Timberlake and Timberland's track. And so then these young people were also that summer studying homelessness and child labor laws, and just the kinds of things that young people have, even the exploitive things that have happened. And so the second verse relates to those concepts that they were talking about, that there should be no hunger, you know. And so let's see, we're going to work on getting the track up. So it's funny, I realized, Brother Khan, that I'm really following your dad's footsteps, in that when Oscar Brown Jr. first got started, he would go to a musician or a singer and say, hey, you know, I'd like to maybe write a song for you, or, you know, could I write lyrics to that song? He went up to the Adderleys. Nat Adderley and his brother were at the Sutherland on 47th and Drexel, really. And they played this song called Work Song. And when they told him what had inspired it, something they saw when they were boys growing up in Florida, men working on a chain gang. And so they entitled the tune Work Song. And based on them telling him that, he wrote, breaking up big rocks on the chain gang, breaking rocks and serving my time. Breaking rocks out here on the chain gang, 'cause I've been convicted of crime. Hold it steady right there while I hit it. I reckon that ought to get it. Been working and working, but I still got so terrible on the go. And he wrote lyrics to a famous Miles Davis song, the sea, the sky, and you and I. Sea and sky and you and I know all blues, all shades, all hues, all blues. So he started out putting lyrics to previously instrumental jazz tunes, right? Janine, That Dare, Afro Blue. These are famous
Afro
ones.
Blue,
yeah. And so I realized that
Nina Simone did that one, right?
Oh no, at least Nina, Abby, a bunch of people have done. Several of the ones that he penned lyrics to these previously instrumental songs. So I realized I'm kind of doing the same thing when I get it with young people. I feel like, well, I want to go right to some. If I start with some jazz, I'll lose them, you know. So I want to start with a track that, you know, appeals to them. And so you know, this has served me. Let's see, I'm trying to find, it's basically, I took My World by no, it's called My Love,
okay,
by Justin. And then we just created this lyric based on what the students were studying that summer that I was telling you about. And so the first lyric has to do with stopping the violence, and the second one has to do with homelessness. And may I say that it's been great to be here with you, and
thank you so much for coming.
Best wishes to all your listeners and everybody. Keep tuning in. And let's see if this is the My Love instrumental. Okay, any last question for me before I sing my final song?
Just what do you recommend for people to get in touch with you? Because if we're going to close with that, you know, that way I can, if they want to reach out to you, maybe have you sing on a song.
Oh, hey,
such as myself.
I love it. That's right. That's right. And please call me, because I love going in the studio, and I don't mind lending my voice. So MaggieBrown.com. Maggie's MAGGIE.
Okay.
Brown, like the color, one word. MaggieBrown.com is my site.
Okay.
And then Maggie Brown is how I'm listed on Facebook. And though there's more than one of us, I'm on there as well. And then let's see, there's info at Blue Gargoyle. Info at thebluegargoyle.com. could get to me too. That's an email through the Blue Gargoyle thing that I'm doing. And Saturdays from about 3 to 4, maybe 3:30 to 4:30, somewhere in that afternoon hour, I usually do something at Arts Bank. It's often different. Sometimes it's an open rehearsal. Sometimes it's, you know, specific kind of stuff that I'm just working on. But as people flow through, you know, they can check out what I'm doing, what I'm working on.
You also have a show or appearance coming up, Northside Action for Justice, during November?
Yeah, November 18th.
November 18th.
And I'm going to use, you probably saw Lance, the band. That was the young band that started playing at our open mics.
Right.
Yeah, well, I've recruited them. We rehearse, and I've had them on a couple gigs. We did some for the Veterans for Peace over the summer, and then they're going to join me for Northside Action for Justice. So that's a you know, what do you call, a resident organization, just trying to make sure that things stay justified.
Do you have the specifics on the location and the time?
You know what it's called? The something Abbey.
Abbey Pub?
It's not, they call it something Abbey. I'll try to look it up before I leave, and certainly I can forward it.
I'll put it in the, I'll put it in the
maybe
description.
have
that way
the thing up.
Yeah,
because, it's definitely, this is an organization that, they definitely deserve attention, you know, because they're trying to stand for people not being duped out of their properties, and the landlords being equitable and fair and just, you know. So yeah, it's a good.
Thank you again, and let's listen to the song.
Yeah, let's see if we can get this to play. So what I want is whoever knows Justin or Timberlake out there to just, you know, send them my way, because I want them to appear in the video. Here we go. So yes, I was working with the young people. This is the track we chose so that they like it, and we put the lyrics that they inspired. Now if I just begin to visualize the world I want to see with these two eyes, the truth would triumph over all the lies, and everyone would create paradise. Now I know it has to start with me, to conjure up the world I want to be, and I can't waste one opportunity to demonstrate the world I want to see. Because I can see a different day, me and my friends going out to play, having fun on a sunny day. So I just hope and I pray that things stay this way. No threat of violence, guns are silenced. That's what this vibe is, cause there won't be no violence in my world. My world, my world. Cause peace is what's required in my world. My world, my world. Cause there won't be no violence in my world. Y'all sing with me. World. Where are my sopranos? World. World. Now in a world of infinite supply, I cannot justify no reason why any children should have to cry. We must save their lives so they won't die. To let a child go hungry is a sin. If we don't save each other, we won't win. The earth is calling for us to begin living and loving like family again. Because I can see a different world, plenty for each boy and girl, with a warm, safe place to stay. So I just hope and I pray that things stay this way. There is no hunger, lives grow longer, we all get stronger. Cause there won't be no hunger in my world. My world, no, my world. Cause there will be no violence in my world. My world, let peace rule the day. My world. Cause there won't be no violence in my world. Let peace rule the day. World. Let peace rule the day. Get T.I. to come and put a rap on top, boy. They probably, don't you think they might cameo on my stuff? Cause it's positive, right? So y'all, reach out to Timberland and reach out to Justin and tell T.I. I was saying, like, you know, if y'all make an appearance, this will really go a whole lot further, right? And Chicago needs it. my world. There won't be no violence in my, there won't be no hunger in my world, my world, my world, my world. Let peace rule the day. Love y'all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maggie Brown. Thank you.